Melvin Cook farms 5 miles southwest of Tracy. He was the first to see the funnel form. His farm was spared, but he called his wife, who phoned the Tracy Police Department. The warning sirens were sounded, and 6 minutes later, the tornado struck. In this basement, Hank Smith and Albion Holmes hid under these stairs and lived to tell about it. Immediately above us, Fred Pilatus, in his 70s, an invalid, was confined to his wheelchair, couldn't get to the basement. He was killed. Lucy Keir, a spinster, went upstairs to see what the noise was all about. The tornado hit before she could get back down. She was found an hour and a half later, buried in the rubble, bruised and broken, but alive. Mr. and Mrs. Tom Noyes had no real place to hide. They had no basement, just this hole in the ground. They took refuge here, and when they looked up, their house was over there.
WCCO Television News presents Thursday in Tracy, a special report on the devastating tornado and the determined town. Narrated by Dave Moore. And presented by Northwestern Bell Telephone Company and the Western Electric Company.
It was 4 minutes after 7 by the clock on the schoolhouse wall. Time stood still. It took less than a minute to undo the work of a lifetime. There was more than boards and bricks and boxes buried in the debris. There were hopes and dreams and memories, but they too were scattered, like the boards and the bricks and the boxes. Gone in a terrible instant, swept away by the tornadic winds that cut a devastating path through Tracy on Thursday. 9 persons died in that tornado. A young girl, an old man, a middle-aged woman, and others. Only names now, but people once. It's amazing that there were not more, but our story is really of those who survived, who must now begin anew to piece their lives back together again. It's the story of the town torn apart by the tornado, and now faced with the massive task of rebuilding. It's the story of suffering shared, of hands joined, of hope and despair. Other towns and other people have survived tornadoes, and Tracy will too. Eventually, the debris will be cleared, new homes will be built, and people will be too busy with the future to bother with the past. Eventually, but not now. Marie Dove is 72, a widow who has lived in this house for a decade or more. She talks proudly of the new paint she had on her walls, of her new carpeting. That was before Thursday. Now she has no home, only a shell. Others don't have even that. Some can find no remnants of their homes at all, or if they do, they're in the next block or beyond. There are hundreds of stories in Tracy about where people found what? Lloyd Olson found his new refrigerator next door. The matching stove was 2 blocks away, along with his carpet and kitchen cupboards. Some of his wife's yard goods were hanging like a flag atop the broken trunk of a nearby tree. No telling where that piano had come from. For most, like Lorraine Ryder, it was a sentimental search for the pieces of their lives that meant something special. The same with Tony Newman, whose home was a block away, but blown in this direction. Young Kent Newman found a few of his toys, a bit tattered and torn perhaps, but then what wasn't? Tony has spent hours on her hands and knees, but she wouldn't think of giving up. What have you found here that's of any value? Have you been able to salvage anything?
Not much. A few clothing articles for the baby and some papers. We found her marriage license. That was important.
Wouldn't it be easier to just pick up and move on?
That's giving up and running. We're young enough to start over. We got land and hopes I think we can get through.
Sometimes hope is not enough. Sometimes you need help. And the people of Tracy have had plenty of that. From everywhere, near, far, and in between, volunteers have come, ready to help Tracy in its time of trouble. Some came with equipment, chainsaws or tractors. Others came with their bare hands and a strong back. Everyone and everything was needed. Tornadoes can wreck a town, but men and machines have to clean up the mess. Neighboring communities dispatched all of their available trucks and bulldozers. Contractors did the same, and many of the men who drove them volunteered their time and efforts. People who went through the twisters in Fridley and Waseca and Albert Lee came to Tracy. They'd been through it once before. They knew what to do. Power and telephone lines had to be restored. Tracy was without electricity for hours on end, despite efforts to restore it by crews from a wide area. There were Mennonites from South Dakota and Minnesota, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, the Seventh-day Adventists, and any number of other individual churches and groups, each doing its share to ease Tracy's burden. No one asked them, they just did it. One unique group of teenagers from Sioux Falls spent their weekend helping in the cleanup. They represent several races and religions and belong to what they call the Silhouette Shack, a non-denominational retreat for troubled teens. They piled into a station wagon with their adult advisor and headed for Tracy, where they were wanted and needed. But to them, they were no heroes.
Today to get your pictures, I'll tell you that. TV cameraman, move. Sorry about that.
Why'd you kids decide to come here to Tracy to help out?
Well, they needed the help, and we thought we had a lot of spare time over the weekend, so we thought we'd come up and help.
It was your decision alone, wasn't it, the kids?
Yes, it was. And we just decided that this would be a good project for our group church and people to see how different races can work together and appreciate each other.
How have the people of Tracy reacted to your coming?
I think they've really enjoyed it because, I mean, everybody's been real nice to us. When we went to eat, they invited us back anytime we wanted to and offered us a place to sleep. And, I mean, they told us that if we went to church, you know, they'd arrange it with the pastor and everything. They were real nice about it. We really liked it here.
Three boys from suburban St. Paul had been helping the Chet Nelsons all day. They kind of adopted the couple, helping them to clean up around what used to be their brick home. The tornado struck on the eve of the Nelsons' 41st anniversary, destroying what had been their home and his family's home before that.
Although we lost everything here, we feel that we're better off than a lot of people.
What did you lose that you really valued, perhaps more than anything else?
Well, I would say my personal pictures. It's hard.
We lost our home, of course, and we don't know what to do. We have no home.
In fact, we lived over there for 28 years, and now here 2 years. And well, I said the only thing I'm glad it happened to us rather than Chet's folks, because they couldn't take it. She died when she was 92, and he was 82. He died 10 years before, so then they planted everything. So those are the things that hurt.
You seem to be very brave in the face of this.
We aren't as brave as we sound. It's...
Well, we just feel we're very fortunate when...
in comparison, yes, to other
people's troubles. We have lost everything we had here, and we're going to try to start over again.
Our old neighborhood, that's completely gone over there, too. It's nothing there. It just seems like it just took this section through here. I said sometimes you sputter about little things when something like this happens. You just don't just count your blessings, I guess, that you're here.
The Northwestern Bell building suffered serious damage. One wall was pushed out 6 inches. Windows were blown out. There were numerous holes in the roof. Phone booths were set up outside the building for emergency use. Although the building's exterior was damaged, the switching equipment inside was unaffected. Western Electric installers on the scene moved 10,000 pounds of equipment away from the buckled wall. Northwestern Bell technicians worked at the test board to locate and determine the extent of the damage to outside telephone wires and cables.
Jack, how did Northwestern Bell react to this emergency here in Tracy?
Well, from the first moment that we received a report that a tornado had passed through the area, and we had confirmed that it had touched down here, we began dispatching crews into the area to rebuild our lines. And although our office here remained operational at all times, we had no difficulty here whatsoever. The widespread devastation is adjacent to the building, and the tornado passed right through this area and damaged this building severely. The equipment remained on the air at all times, and we had people coming in from the area where the homes had been damaged and destroyed, coming in here and making calls, and we did have quite an influx of calls at that time, and our circuits were heavily loaded, but the office remained on the air at all times.
Of Tracy's more than 2,200 phones, 400 were out of service Thursday night, some 200 of them in homes wiped out or damaged severely by the tornado. Of the remaining 200 phones, service was completely restored by today. Immediately after the tornado struck, an assessment of damage was made by Northwestern Bell. Then a call for materials went out to the Western Electric Distributing House in Minneapolis. In a matter of a few hours, a truck loaded with cables, wires, and other equipment was on its way to Tracy. Many of the 80 Northwestern Bell and Western Electric technicians worked around the clock to restore service. There were several reasons why Tracy's telephone system continued to work after the tornado. One was the use of a portable emergency generator that supplied power. In addition to which, all of Northwestern Bell's long distance and most of its local cables in the Tracy area are underground. Shortly after the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy, the Tracy Lutheran Church had set Sunday aside as a day of memorial. Then the twister came, and suddenly the memorial had a more immediate meaning. The pastor of this church, the Reverend Richard Peterson, ministered to many of the dying and injured on Thursday night, and it had a strong impact on him.
You're turning your back on Jesus Christ. I have been in places where destruction has happened before. When we were in Europe, we leveled city after city. But it was different here. But the smell was all the same. The smell of destruction, the smell of hurt, and the smell of anguish and death. Here in this congregation tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, God willing, the funeral service for Mrs. Ellen Morgan. At 2 p.m. in the afternoon for Mr. Paul Swanson. At 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the funeral service for Mr. Wallace Swanson, and this will be at the Oman Butson Funeral Chapel. And then on Tuesday at 2 p.m., the funeral for Mr. Fred Pilatus. In addition to those, the others who lost their lives that I am aware of, Mrs. John Werner, little Nancy Vasky, Grandma Haney, Mrs. Holbrook, Mrs. Charles Harnden, and to these our brethren, in their hour of sorrow, shock, and heartache, we express our sympathy and our concern.
There was a steady stream of mourners to and from the local mortuary. Never in the city's history had so many died in so short a time. Most of the victims were elderly, including Fred Pilatus, an invalid whose wife was injured. She has made a steady recovery, but will never blot that night from her mind.
This is my second tornado I went through.
What were your thoughts that night, and what are they now about that night?
Oh, Lance, I don't know. My thoughts didn't have time to think then when I was going out. All I was thinking of to protect him and see if we could get through. The Lord would save us. That's what we was both hollering, that he should save us. but it didn't save my husband.
In the same hospital room, Mrs. Walter Yoder, a 90-year-old widow who survived by holding on to her daughter and grandson.
We was all praying when it struck, or if we'd have been gone. And my Bible, it was about as far as me at that room over there, and I found it laying right by the side of my head when I got up. And I picked it up and carried it with me. That's the only thing I took out.
It's kind of symbolic to you?
Yes, it was. And there's a picture of Christ's Last Supper. His wasn't broke, and another picture of Christ, it wasn't broke either. It was all laid down just as nice as you picked him up and laid him there. It was funny. It was, I don't know, a miracle, I guess.
Perhaps the most solitary figure in Tracy is Private Clifford Vasky, called home from basic training at Fort Lewis, Washington, to find his home in ruins, the foster child he planned to adopt dead, and his wife in the hospital, critically injured. Cliff has served only 5 weeks of his 2-year Army hitch, but he has now applied through the Red Cross for a hardship discharge. He says he wants to get out for the sake of his wife, Linda, whom he says would be lost without him, their home, or little Nancy, the foster child who died in the tornado. Young Vasky knew what to expect when he came home, but he still couldn't believe what he saw.
Well, I said to myself, oh my God, I couldn't believe it, you know. I honestly, something like this could happen. You know, it's just not right. I thought to myself, you know, it's just not right that this should happen, especially to people like me and my wife. You know, we never did nothing wrong. Started from scratch, nobody gave us nothing, and now we have to start all over again. I mean, it's really hard on her. I mean, I don't mind the loss so much as her injuries and especially the loss of the girl. But the point is, we still have to start over, and you can't do it when a guy's in the service, and it's just rough, really, real rough.
You found anything of value here that going through this debris?
To tell you the truth, I never found nothing whatsoever that belonged to me here, except my car, and that was about 2 blocks away. Nothing else that really belonged to us was here, nothing. I had a lot of personal items, and it just all is gone. Nobody found nothing.
Cliff Vasky's young sister-in-law, Pamela Haugen, was with her sister Linda and the baby when the twister struck. She, too, is injured, and only in the past day was allowed to leave the hospital.
Pam, I understand you're going to go home today.
Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of glad I am, too.
I bet you are. Do you still hurt a little bit, or do you feel much better now?
I feel much better.
What are you going to do the first thing you get home?
Well, I'm going to play with my sisters first, and then probably I'll take a little nap.
Have the doctors told you you've got to take it easy?
Mm-hmm.
How have you liked your stay in the hospital?
It was pretty good. At least I made a little things. Got a new doll and got $12 in my purse.
Pam, what do you remember about the night that you were hurt, the night of the tornado?
Oh, I remember I got picked up off the ground. I remember seeing my sister rolling in the grass. And I remember dropping to the ground. That's about all. I remember a few other things.
Like what?
Like not seeing Nancy in Linda's arms anymore. And going to Filter's house. And that's all.
You can't accurately measure the losses in a tornado such as this unless you're content to count buildings condemned or destroyed or to tally insurance estimates. In a disaster of this scope, the real losses aren't tabulated in dollars and cents. There are human costs, not only in loss of life and limb, but in loss of homes and jobs and possessions that are irreplaceable at any price. In those terms, the full damage done to Tracy may never be known. Trees that have shaded the streets and yards of Tracy for generations are gone now. No money, only more generations can replace them. Of course, not all of Tracy was hit by the twister, but officials think that a quarter of the city's 800-odd homes eventually will be claimed by the storm. Latest estimates indicate that about 110 homes were destroyed, with dozens more heavily damaged and an additional 100 or more sustaining less severe damage. For those destroyed but not actually demolished by the tornado, a tractor or a bulldozer waited in the wings to finish the job. Chunk by chunk, house by house, the area is cleared to make ready for the new. The only public building in Tracy hard hit by the twister was the public elementary school, which sat directly in the path of the funnel. Part of the building, which housed about 500 children during the school year, was decades old. But there was a new addition, and city and school officials think it will cost at least $1 million to replace it. But it would have had to come down eventually anyway. Total damage in the community has been set tentatively at $3 to $4 million, including several businesses and outlying farms damaged or destroyed. Lyon County, which includes Tracy, has been declared a disaster area by the Small Business Administration, enabling those who suffered in the fury of the tornado to get the long-term low-interest loans. Many of the residents we talked to were covered by insurance, but few knew how much coverage they had or what monetary losses, if any, they would have to bear. No one is without a home, or at least a roof over his head. Friends and relatives have opened their doors to the homeless, providing temporary food and shelter and clothing to those without. Donations of clothing and bedding have poured into the town, with a number of groups setting up disaster headquarters, which of course does not eliminate the hardship, but it does give the residents a chance to catch their breath while trying to decide what to do next. Many have decided to rebuild, and the city has plans too.
It's B-O-M-B-O-K-E-R-M, right?
In a way, Tracy is a city divided. You may drive up a street and find nothing but destruction like this on one side. On the other, homes are virtually untouched. Such is the peculiar pattern of a tornado. There are few natural forces that can match a tornado in intensity or in fickleness. The pattern has been repeated time and time again in the Minneapolis suburbs, in Albert Lea, Waseca, Colfax, Wisconsin, Charles City, and Owine, Iowa. Deadly and erratic. But Tracy is a city on the mend. It has absorbed the blow that Mother Nature dealt and already has begun to bounce back. Some sense of normalcy is returning. Most of the streets have been cleared of litter. Cars again may navigate through the community. Sightseers have been barred from the city since the tornado struck, but now the roadblocks are being taken down. The last of the National Guard troops have been released from duty. The sense of urgency has passed. Much work remains to be done, but the big jobs are done. Essential services to the public have been restored. Hazardous buildings have been removed or locked up. Cleanup efforts will continue here for weeks and months, perhaps for years. Tracy may never rid itself of all the scars left last Thursday, but it has made a beginning. The giant gashes are gone, and only time will heal the entire face of the community. And the people of Tracy finally have the chance to get out and look around their city. Most of them have been so busy cleaning up their own homes or backyards that they haven't had the chance to see what has happened elsewhere. The city already is making plans for the future, not just for tomorrow. Common Council President Dr. Jack Vom Boekum.
We're going to need low-rent housing for the elderly. We want to get funds from the federal government, and we've got this started. We're going to need it now. This is these people that lived in this area here, many of them are older, probably more proportion than other parts of the town, and this is going to be a serious problem. And like I mentioned before, this is what we talked to Senator McCarthy about, and it's going to come. Yes, we've done so many things. We've got our hospital. We're already let the contract to blacktop our airport. We've got a consultant to help us out in industrial development. Not that this will ever be an industrial center, but it'll provide jobs. We're going to have a real immediate problem in housing and what to do with these people and helping them. And we do have new zoning and housing codes that are going to really help us out now. We're not going to have to scramble around. This area is going to look real nice when it's done. It's too bad it has to happen this way, but it will look real nice afterwards.
Did you say most?
No one really knows how many of the residents of Tracy will rebuild or how many will just pack up and leave the bad memories of Thursday night behind. That will be an individual decision. But the community decision is to push ahead, to build new where the old once stood, to create a better city from the debris. To accomplish that, Tracy will need help from the federal government, from the state, but most of all from the people who lived through Thursday night, a night no one in Tracy can ever forget.
Thursday in Tracy. Has been presented by Northwestern Bell and Western Electric.